All right, guys, welcome back to the Elite SAR Training YouTube channel and our basic search operations course. We're going to continue on our search tactics module, and in this particular video, we're going to talk about the different resources that you may encounter on a SAR mission. Again, there's a lot of very unique resources that are out there. This is being presented in more of a general sense. Some of the more commonly deployed resources that I've encountered over the years. But really what we're driving at is just to give a little bit of overview of what they are, what they do, and how we need to interact them from the search operator perspective. One of the most likely resources that you're going to encounter on a mission is a canine. It's some kind of a canine resource, and there's different capabilities of canines. But this is by far probably one of the more common resources that you're going to encounter on during a mission. So whenever we talk about canines and canine handlers, it's a team, right? It's the handler and the canine, and they are trained to leverage the dog's sense of smell to hone in on lost individuals. That's what they're keying off of. Canines, there's a ton of different theory on exactly what they follow and how they follow it, but the biology behind it is canines can have more than 100 million sensory receptor sites in their nasal cavity, which is compared to the 6 million in humans. So it's many more times more sensitive than a human sense of smell. The area in the canine brain is devoted to analyzing odors is roughly 40 times larger and more developed than the comparable part in the human brain. This is their area of expertise. You know, dogs can smell anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 times better than people. So there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of biology here that we can lean on to leverage this as a resource. There's many disciplines, as I mentioned before, in canine, and I've run into some canines that have some cross functionality. They may be trained in multiple disciplines. The big three that I typically run into are track trailing canines, and there is a distinction between a tracking canine and a trailing canine, but the key here is they're following a specific scent. They're following a specific scent. Typically, it's the specific human scent, which requires the use of a scent article, some kind of an article of clothing. You know, maybe they'll scent off a vehicle, a discarded item. But track trailing, we're looking at something that's scent discriminatory is what we're looking for there. The next flavor would be a dog that's trained in human remains detection. These dogs ignore live human scent and only indicate on human remains. So as soon as the body starts to decay, it puts off a different odor, and they are trained to detect that odor. Air scent canines operate a little bit differently. They're looking for the freshest human scent. They follow air currents. They're deployed a little bit differently than your track trailing canines, but they're following those air currents towards the freshest human scent in an area. So they're a unique resource that whenever you deploy them correctly, they can eliminate some very large areas for you. But they can also make finds as well. They're a really cool resource to see in the field. As a best practice, we'll talk about the team structure just a little bit, because you may find yourself in a situation where you are asked to be a safety for a canine handler, or you may be asked to go with a canine handler and out into on an assignment. So how the team is typically structured is you'll have the canine and the canine handler, and then you'll have a safety. Okay, the canine or a backup. I've heard it called backup as well. The handler's job in this arrangement is to read and interpret the information that is conveyed by the canine. Their focus is exclusively on the canine, reading the dog, looking at the body language, looking at the movement. Their focus is on the dog based off of their training, based off of their experiences. They'll look for certain indicators that the dog is putting off, that they are, on track or they're on scent, and we're moving in the right direction, what they believe to be the right direction. So the canine handler should be exclusively focused on the canine. The safety or the backup, their primary responsibility is to ensure of the they're to supervise the safety of the canine and the handler. They're looking out for hazards. They're looking out for things that are coming up. With the focus of the canine on the scent trail and the focus of the handler on the canine, the safety or the backup, they have to remain vigilant for anything that may harm the canine or the handler. They're also looking out for, a visual, glancing off to see if they can catch any kind of clues, but they're primarily focused on the safety of the canine and the handler there. They should also be responsible for the team communications, navigation, documentation. They should be handling all of that, so that way the canine handler and the canine can work together to follow the track, to stay on track. Okay. Some of the limitations with canines, they're a fantastic resource, but they're less effective after time passes and the scent will dissipate. I've run into a very wide range of skills and capabilities whenever it comes to canine handlers. And that's just because there's not a whole lot of formalized training out there. Some of the it's more, I would say it's less standardized, I guess is a good way for it. A lot of it is based on tribal knowledge, or it's there's small pockets of expertise, and a lot of it is based on the interpretation of the handler, or if someone that is a new handler, whatever mentor they're seeking guidance from, they're usually catching a lot of that interpretation as well. So the skill levels can vary widely, because a formalized training may not be sought, it may not be available, and it's certainly not standardized. So that doesn't mean it's ineffective, because I've seen some very effective canines and canine handlers without any formalized training at all. It just kind of depends. But just something to kind of bear in mind and keep an eye out for, and keep in the back of your mind whenever you're out there. And then of course there's the weather impact. Um, you know, it, weather impacts just about every element on a search. It also directly impacts the performance of the canine as well. Whenever it's super hot and humid, dogs heat up quickly. They can't stay on track very long. The scent may dissipate quicker. Whenever it gets cooler outside, the scent may settle a little bit better. But we're talking about very light microscopic particles that can easily be kicked up by the air. They can start to dissipate whenever it starts to warm up. There's a lot of things that could impact from a weather perspective. In terms of how you should interact with a canine, because this is likely something you're going to encounter whenever you're out there on a search. Everyone sees the doggy and they always want to pet the doggy. So always ask the handler's permission to interact with the canine before petting or feeding. These at the end of the day, these are working dogs. And I know this may sound very rudimentary and very fundamental, a little remedial even. But I have seen some people that they just have no idea how to interact around a working dog before. It may be something that's totally new to them, and they just see a doggy. So make sure you ask for permission before you do anything. Watch where you're spraying your insect repellent. You don't want to do that around a canine. It can mess with their ability. It kind of gets in their nasal cavities, and can really disrupt their ability to perform. Don't do anything that's going to distract them while they're working. Give them space to work. If you're not familiar or used to working with a specific canine or canine handler, ask the handler, hey, how far do I need to stay back? Where do I need to be? So that way you guys can do your work. I need to make sure that I can observe, and my responsibility is to look out for you guys' safety. So I don't want to be too far back, but how much space do you need to work on this? Don't handle the canine scent article unless you're trained to do so. The way that scent articles are handled, they need to be handled with extreme care, so that way it's not contaminated. We want to give our canines the absolute best opportunity to get a really good scent off the article. Don't handle it. Don't collect it. We want to try to let the canine handler take the lead on that. But if you are trained to do so, that's it's okay for you to do that. But only do that if you're trained to do so. My recommendation there would be defer to the handler to collect their own scent article, and they should maintain it, and so that way it's handled appropriately. If possible, preserve an area, preserve the area the canine has been tasked to search by keeping other responders and other canines out. If we have an area that we want to send a canine in, try to preserve it the best we can. Don't send anybody out ahead. Do anything that could potentially compromise or contaminate that area. Okay, we want to preserve that the best we can. The next most common resource you may encounter are man trackers. Man trackers are a little bit more rare of a skill set, but they are out there. They are trained individuals specialized in locating human tracks and sign. They can be highly efficient if they're utilized properly, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here momentarily. But they can also be used to eliminate large portions of a search area with the way that they can go through and detect. And then if you do find any clues or evidence, they can help corroborate that. Okay, so you'll hear the term man tracker quite a bit, and you'll also it should not be confused with this concept of being track aware. And later on in the basic search operations program, we'll have an entire module dedicated to track awareness. Being track aware is an essential requirement. It's something that every searcher that steps in the field should be track aware. Does not necessarily mean that they're a man tracker, but they should understand exactly how to interact around a track or evidence, so that way they can kind of preserve that scene better, or honestly just know what to look for. So being a man tracker and being a track aware is are two different things. Man tracking is a very disciplined and specialized skill set that takes years to develop and become proficient. Becoming track aware is usually a little bit quicker after you get through some of that basic ground search training. You can move into becoming track aware fairly quickly. Like I said, with this program, I built it into the program because it's that important. It's that fundamental. But it's also the first steps at becoming towards a man tracker. So whenever we say being track aware, you're able to identify a track and identify the likely locations of tracks. You know what it looks like. You know kind of about where you may find one, and so that makes you react differently as you're moving through the environment. Proficiency in track awareness can be attained in a much shorter time frame with minimal field work. Honestly, we'll go through slides in a little bit on a future module on being track aware. You do a brief introduction like that, spend a good solid weekend in the field, and you can walk out of there being pretty effective at a track aware level. Being a man tracker is a little bit different. You're able to identify specific tracks belonging to specific individuals, even whenever there's other tracks present. The time dedication and the training, both in the classroom, in the field, the self training, the training with others, the required time there, it's enormous. It's an enormous dedication. So to become at any level of proficiency on that. So it's the time dedication is significantly more than becoming track aware, but that gets it where you can identify specific tracks belonging to specific people. It requires a lot of self-sufficiency, extreme levels of patience. It takes quite a bit to really get into that man tracker space. In terms of limitations, just like with canines, as time passes, we become less effective. Clues are either lost or destroyed. They're either replaced with contamination, or just the environment does enough destruction to the clue where it fades out to where it's indistinguishable between the rest of the baseline. But as time passes, the less effective a man tracker is going to become. And same thing as with canines, the skill levels can vary widely. There is a little bit more formalized training regimen around becoming a man tracker, more so than a canine handler, but I've still run into a lot of self-taught man trackers. I would consider myself more self-taught than formally trained. I have attended a handful of formalized trainings, but we spend a lot of time out on our own, just studying tracks, examining, And so you start to develop your own way of working just by nature of that. So it's another instance where formalized training may not be sought, may not be available, or may not be standardized. A lot of it again is the science doesn't change behind it, but the interpretation of the science does change. And again, weather can be an impact for us as well. In terms of interacting with man trackers, they need to be utilized in the early stages of a search to maximize their utility. Okay, in many cases they're not, and they can be brought in later on after a search effort has begun. They're just much more effective at the beginning whenever those tracks are more fresh. There's been fewer people in the area, so there's less for us to have to cut through to try to find to try to identify sign that belongs to our victim. As a ground searcher, consider the following whenever you're working with man trackers. If you know where the last known point is or the point last seen, try to stay away. Try to minimize the amount of containment around that area. If you locate a physical clue that could belong to the subject, minimize the foot traffic in and out of that area. Preserve that area the best you can and avoid approaching altogether if possible. If there's a clue on the ground, it likely did not get there on its own. So there's likely going to be tracks nearby. So we want to preserve that area the best we can. Give man trackers the best opportunity we can to find a track, get a direction of travel, so that way we can start to refocus our search efforts somewhere else. If you come across any areas that are particularly good at showing tracks, make sure you take note of those. We call those track traps. We'll spend more time on that later on. But these are areas where they seem to catch tracks a lot better. There's just something about the soil texture or what is captured whenever we stepped on it, the impression. There's just something about it that is particularly good at capturing and showing tracks. We want to preserve and make man trackers aware of where these are, where these track traps are, so that way they can either go check or get on a routine of checking regularly. And then lastly, just be able to show on a map where you've been, so that way if a man tracker is sent in later, they know where your tracks are, and they know that other searchers have been in the area. That way they can start to weed out what's searcher and what's potentially not searcher. Honestly, know what your tracks look like. Get familiar with the own pattern on your boots, so that way if we take a picture or we start to describe it over the radio, we can quickly determine whether or not it belongs to a searcher or not. Next, we're going to talk about interviewers. Interviewers are trained individuals that specialize in extracting information from family, friends, associates, or other witnesses. These folks are very gifted and possess a deep understanding of emotional intelligence, which is used to help pull potentially valuable information out of a subject, an interview subject. This is very helpful for us because, again, as I mentioned in the last module, the information we may have at first is not always the best information to have. It may not be very accurate, may not be very reliable. If you have someone that's trained in pulling information out and extracting information, these guys are worth their weight in gold. They can really help pull information out that redirects our search efforts. They can help discern some fact from fiction about our victim. They can corroborate any evidence or clues that have been found. That's where they really shine is just through interviewing and talking to people. We can build a better subject profile. We can get a better idea of what the victim's intentions or actions could have been. So that way we can help look at the map, look at our search plan, and start to dial in on the information that they pull out. The big limitation with them is you have to understand it takes some time. It can take a long time to pull the right information from the right people. I'm sure there's in every search there's likely more than one witness that has some information, whether it's good information or bad information. There's plenty of people that they can pull from, but getting the stuff that's valuable that can contribute to the search efforts, that can take a little while to pull. So make sure they, in terms of interacting with them, understand that that process can be slow, and some of that information may never be available. Some of the information that you want to know about your victim it may never be made available. We may not find the right person to talk to that's going to have that information. So understand that, they're out there working hard. They're trying to pull information. They're trying to pull the right information. But it really depends on who they find and what they know. Okay, and then understand again, some of the information that they pull, it may turn out to be false or incomplete. They're pulling information in and they're trying to discern what's fact or fiction. Sometimes it may not work out in the way they want to, and we may pull bad information. We may be being purposely misled. So it's up to the interviewer to kind of discern that before they share it. But errors are going to happen. It's absolutely going to happen. So they can only work with the information that's provided. So make sure you give them a little bit of grace on the information that's pulled and the timing of when that information is pulled. Give them a little bit of grace on that. And lastly, we're going to talk about mounted searchers. So mounted searchers have introduced a different element to our search. They're trained in utilizing horses to perform various search functions. The really cool things about them are, they can leverage that elevated position and also leverage the horse's natural strengths in terms of detection. They can be used to search quickly from an elevated platform. If trained properly, the horse and the rider can be used to detect human sign. It's similar in nature to a canine. A little bit different. It could be scenting, but it could also be the horse's eyesight or their hearing. Training the searcher to look for those cues is a possibility if trained properly. And of course, they can be used to transport supplies, equipment in and out of the area quickly. Okay, so there's a lot of utility in having mounted searchers and having horses around. Some of their limitations are they can be very destructive. I mean, you've got a pretty good sized animal with a rider sitting on top, and so if they're going through a lot of trails, they're leaving behind a lot of their own sign behind. They're generating a lot of clues, which can be destructive to any clues that a victim left. I'm not saying it's gone completely or it's always going to happen, but just be mindful of where they're deployed. If it's an area that you think is particularly hot for sign, they may not be the best resource to send in that area, but they can provide utility in other places as well. So, but they can be very destructive. It may be difficult for the horse to detect a subtle clue or to look for those smaller clues from horseback. If we're looking for a track or something very small, it may be difficult. With the speed the horse is moving and the elevation, it may be hard for them to find that smaller item, and it may be more difficult to find trained resources. And this is something we talked about with trackers and canines. Finding an equine unit that is trained in search and rescue, has experience in search and rescue, may be a little bit difficult to find. And then you can still utilize a guy on a horse that just shows up. They can still be a valuable asset to you. But finding a trained mounted searcher may be a little bit more difficult to find. And it takes a little bit more time for them to respond. They've got a little bit more. That they need to pull together to respond. So it may take them a little bit of time to get the trailer hooked up, get everything that they need inside the trailer, and to get them a place to set up where they can park. It takes a little bit more coordination. So that's one of the limitations too. Is you got to have some space for them, and it takes a little bit of time for them to get there. In terms of interacting with them, just like with canines, give them space. Give the mounted searcher space. You don't want to do anything that might startle or otherwise endanger the horse or the rider. Give them plenty of room as they're moving through the area. Maintain the perception of no apparent threat. Okay, that way the horse is comfortable. They're not going to react in a way that may put themselves or the rider in any kind of danger. So that brings us to the end of the SAR resources portion of search tactics. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next video.